Hi and welcome to Mind 123. I'm Chantal Broderick and I'm here today at the beautiful Gwingana Retreat on the Gold Coast hinterland in Queensland, Australia. Our special guest for today is psychotherapist and relationship counsellor Jonathan Swan. Jonathan, welcome along. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Chantal.
Now, we are talking about the 3 C's that make up a great relationship. And in another video, we did a brief overview about all 3, but today we're going to dive in specifically to communication. Before we do that, can you just remind everyone what the 3 C's are?
Okay, yes. The 3 C's are communication, connection and compassion. And the 3 C's are interdependent and interrelate with each other. So they're all part of a good relationship, a healthy relationship, a relationship you want to grow as well as a relationship you want to heal.
Wonderful. So let's dive right into communication. Tell us about how that fits into the 3 C's.
Okay, so with communication, it's really important to understand that communication essentially is emotional in nature. That, we think of communication as about perspectives and opinions and ideas and so forth, which are important. But what often happens in a relationship, particularly an intimate relationship, is we tend to forget about the emotional nature of communication. So we get really stuck in trying to battle through problems in a relationship. And those problems are often, he said, she said, or I see it this way, you see it that way. And we can't really make progress because we have all these differences of opinion all the time. And what's happening when we have these differences and these conflicts and we're escalating, the conflict is increasing, as we battle backwards and forwards, we're actually, as I said, rupturing the emotional bond, which is really, really critical in a relationship, that connection that sort of lies underneath a relationship, those feelings of, being on the same page or on the same team, I've heard, all sorts of different metaphors for what that feels like, that nice emotional bond. And through conflict and difference, and all relationships have difference, it's par for the course, but it's about dealing with difference, so that if you deal with difference as well, then you don't disrupt the connection, So fundamentally, when it comes down to communication, you've got to understand there's both the intellectual aspects of communicating, the ideas and opinions, as well as the emotional aspects underneath that. And often we neglect those, we put them aside, and we don't talk about the emotional impacts, the feelings that are being impacted in that place of difference. So when the stresses come into a relationship, whether they be external, the financial, the business stuff, or the internal stresses in a relationship, those ruptures in the connection cause the communication then to sort of break down, because it's not emotional usually in nature. And if it is emotional in nature, it's usually screaming at each other. There's a lot of arguing and fighting and a lot of frustration and a lot of irritation and annoyance. And then it becomes blaming, the blame game comes into it. We start attacking the other person, criticising them. And then when one's criticised, they either attack back or they pull back themselves. So we get these sort of emotional movements in the relationship, but we're not communicating about that. So what's really important is to understand, firstly, what's the pattern? What's our pattern? What's our normal pattern in a relationship, and how do we need to communicate about that pattern? And what are the things I'm doing, feeling, and thinking that are contributing to that negative interaction, that negative pattern?
Jonathan, are there any common examples that you come across with the couples that come and see you that you might be able to share so that we can relate to where that communication breakdown might be?
Yeah, sure. So there's often, you got to understand the pattern first. You got to understand what that interaction's like. We bring into a relationship a certain style, a certain way of relating. Often there's the kind of the withdrawer type who pulls back, puts up a wall, shuts down. Then the other type is one who's much more needs that contact, needs to resolve things, needs to sort it out, and if it's not sorted out, it feels like unfinished business. It's packed away and it comes up again, So we got to understand what sort of type we bring into the relationship, and through understanding what that type is, we can begin to understand what we're feeling in that space. When we withdraw, what's actually happening? Are we anxious? Are we interpreting everything through a filter that our partner is saying, like it's criticism and accusation? So then we get defensive and we put up a wall, and we shut down our emotions. But we don't tell our partner what's happening. We just do the shutdown. And that in that particular pattern frustrates the other party because they're just trying to get their contact. They're trying to communicate and, come on, let's communicate, let's work through this. But they're often frustrated, irritated, and annoyed. So there's a lot of tone in their voice. So around and around we go. We kind of get into this cycle, this negative interaction cycle, or a dysfunctional pattern of relating. And what I always say, it's not to do with the people, it's the pattern. It's the pattern that occurs between people, not the people. So we take away blame. Nobody's at fault in a relationship. It's just two people with their particular styles and character that they bring to this interaction, which is great and harmonious in the beginning, but then it slowly starts to get a bit difficult. And that's when we need to bring in those, communication styles. And to give you an example, so underneath a withdrawing communication style might be anxiety, but it's being expressed as sort of stonewalling, frustration, and passive aggressive, and pushing away and shutting off that emotional connection that's so important. So what needs to happen is to begin to explore what's underneath that. What's the emotional landscape underneath that anxiety? What's underneath that behaviour? What's the thoughts that are circling around in that person's head when they hear the other person kind of criticising them or accusing them or blaming them? Where do they go, and what does it bring up from their past? So by bringing that into the interaction, that awareness of how I contribute to that pattern, and beginning to bring that into the relationship, in a supported, facilitated way, obviously, because that's what happens in therapy, then we begin to bring better, more healthier communication into the relationship.
Jonathan, based on everything we've just gone over, are there any practical strategies that you can recommend that people can actually do right away, take home, to improve their communication with their partner?
Yes, indeed. There's a favourite one that I always try to reframe. Often in a relationship, something goes wrong with a partner. We notice they're kind of pulling back, or they're going quiet, or maybe the other partner is being a little bit intense for us. What we often say is, "What's wrong?" We go, "What's wrong?" And that never lands very well, right? Maybe you know that place yourself. What's wrong? It always puts the other person on the back foot. They always kind of go, "Well, what's wrong? What's wrong with me?" That's the implication. Even though the other person doesn't have the intention to sort of point out something's wrong with you, it's an innocent inquiry into, "Can you tell me what's going on?" But it's always it's driven with emotion too. It's like, kind of, "What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong." And the other person is automatically put on the back foot. So I often advise clients to kind of reframe that into something a little bit less intrusive and a little less shaming, actually, or blaming. It's to reframe that as, "I noticed something. I noticed something's shifted. I noticed something." So it's a bit like being more curious about something different in your partner's change in energy or emotion. "Hey, sweetie, something's gone on. What's happened?" So that's an invitation to an exploration of something that's happening in the relationship, rather than, "Can you tell me what's wrong?" So that's a really nice little tip too.
That's a beautiful example. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I want to remind everyone that, of course, this is one of our 3-part series, because we've got communication, we've got connection, and we've got compassion. So thank you for diving into that in such great detail. And I might just finish off by saying, if someone does need to seek some therapy, they do want to talk to someone, a professional, about this, what's the best course of action for them?
To find somebody who's skilled, who's been trained. You need to find somebody who's been trained in relationship therapy, because it is a difficult art, and they need to see someone with a skill. So they're in safe hands.
Wonderful. Jonathan, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
You're welcome, Chantal.